Hello, FPL managers. Welcome to the FPL Optimized podcast. This is episode number 60. Welcome back and thanks for listening again. I'm Sertalp, your host today. This is the podcast in which we combine analytics with the good old eye test. Data or grass or data and grass? That's the question. My co-host Bas is out for this week again and I am on my wildcard. So this episode will be a wildcard special episode. I have another great guest for you today. James Palmer, also known as Trout, is joining me in today's episode. Well, he needs no introduction among analytics circle. He's a legend. But for people who are not familiar, Trout is one of the most prominent FPL players utilizing optimization to a great extent. He has his own optimization model. He's one of the few people who has his own optimization model, actually. He played FPL for 4 seasons, if I recall correctly, and 3 of them are inside top 100k. And the fourth one is actually a 101k, right? So you were so close.
Yeah, that was a painful one. Yeah.
But more than that, he's a truly great manager by other measures we use in analytics, such as massive data rank. And of course, he's part of Elite 1000. Let's say hi to him first. Trout or James, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Sertalp. It's really, really fantastic to be here. I'm very excited to be converting for 1 week only your podcast into a hardline analytics podcast.
Yeah, it's always fun.
You're going to lose exactly. You're going to lose your whole audience, I'm afraid, but it's gonna be worth it for the extreme insights that we're going to bring.
Yeah, with Haaland. Yep. Well, I wanted to invite Trout because we are playing together this season. As parenthood is proved to be a difficult thing for me, I wanted to share the burden with someone who is familiar with optimization, plays analytically using projection data, and speak the same language in general. So I asked him if we can kind of like make our decisions together through the season, because it kind of helps me to put the FPL on the back burner sometimes if the life is very busy. So, as you see, our ranks is the same. We have the same team, and we are both on Wildcard 8 and making some plans for Game Week 8 and beyond. So, how do you feel about using your Wildcard in Game Week 8, James?
How do I feel? In a word, I would say I'm poised. I'm very I'm feeling really positive about it. I think it's overall a good time to play it. I mean, of course, I think that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be playing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an exciting time to get an advantage on the field, and I'm glad you're here for the ride with me because I guess I'm surprised the Game Week 8 wildcard, it has caught a lot of mainstream appeal, but maybe it's not caught on as much as I was expecting in the analytics community. I think most people are choosing to wait it out till probably Game Week 19. But no, it's good that we're both on it. But, since I am, I suppose, your puppet master, and the brains behind the beauty, it's inevitable.
True. True.
But yeah, I also think, it's been a tough start to the season, hasn't it? It's been really tough. And I know that luck doesn't really work like this. Who knows how luck really works? I clearly don't understand it. But it feels like a time to make a fresh start, and if we are gonna get this situation turned around, now is the time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, people were kind of saying that people are motivated to use Wildcard 8 because they didn't have a really good game week in Game Week 7. But in our case, it's just different. We had a really nice game week in 7, and then now we are using our wildcard. I mean, in earlier episodes, I encouraged people to keep their wildcard until they need it. But, well, somehow we found ourselves to be forced to use wildcard 8. Especially our decision in Game Week 7 was with the idea that we will use wildcard in 8 so that we can utilize the double game week to a great extent.
Yeah, we intentionally backed ourselves into a corner on that one. I mean, the Game Week 8 wildcard is interesting, right? Like, I've had it, I think, in the back of my mind since about 10 minutes after the Luton-Burnley double game week was originally announced. And it's felt like every game week since then, it's kind of grown and grown and grown in my mind until it's basically the idea of not using it is almost unbearable. I think it's fine. Like, I think the decision to go to hold it till later when there was about, for us, I think probably about 20 points expected to be on the table for us using the wildcard. I think it's yeah. Both decisions are fine. It's not a situation where I feel like there's clearly a right play or a wrong play, but I'm happy with the decision.
Yeah, perfect. Well, before we discuss Wildcard 8 plans, let's start with a quick recap of the past game week, with my game week and Buzz's game week. So I finished the game week with 62 points, moving from 3.8 million overall rank to 2.7. A pretty decent game week. And Buzz finished game week with only 34 points, bringing our head-to-head competition to 5-2, still in his favor. But like despite me losing so badly, we have only 5 points between us now in FPL. And yeah, captaining Morris and getting Doughty were the highlights for me. And Buzz surprised me by bringing Antonio this game week. And we won't cover the model accuracy section today because we have a lot of things to discuss about Wildcard 8. But let's start with checking our fixture ticker. For people who are not familiar with this, so this is the projected point averages, and what we do is we get the projected points from several models. We just combine them and we divide the entire total points to minutes, multiply it by 90. So what you see is average points per 90 minutes for every team, split by defense and offense, and defense includes goalkeeper and defenders, and offense includes midfielders and forwards. And Liverpool is topping our chart, meaning that for the next 6 game week, Liverpool has the best fixtures. And our fixture ticker is a little bit interesting because since we are using projected points, it also takes the team's own quality into consideration. So it doesn't really mean that Liverpool has the best fixtures compared to all the other teams, excluding their own strength. But we are also kind of using their own strength mixed with it. And in the second rank, we have Newcastle, and then comes Manchester City. Then we have Arsenal, Tottenham, Brighton, Manchester United, Aston Villa, Crystal Palace, and West Ham. And you might be wondering where the Chelsea is. And Chelsea is in the bottom half. We will talk about that in a second. But for this game week, the best fixture that you can target is actually Tottenham's Luton game. If you check it, I mean, even though Liverpool has the best fixtures overall, their fixture this game week, they are playing against Brighton away, but Tottenham is playing against Luton Town, and defensively it is such a good fixture that their point average is 4.3, and that's the actually only game that makes to our top 10 percentile category. Liverpool has great fixtures in game week 9, 10, 11. They are playing against Everton, Nottingham Forest, and Luton Town. And also they are playing against Brentford in game week 12. And Newcastle is here because they are playing against Crystal Palace in game week 9 and Wolves in game week 10. And Bournemouth 12 and Chelsea game week 13. I'm actually a little bit surprised that this game makes it to top 10 percentile in terms of defensively. You don't see Chelsea as a good fixture in general in most tickers, I guess. And then Manchester City has Brighton in game week 9 and Bournemouth in game week 11. So those are favorable fixtures for them. But as you might remember, Manchester City was leading this chart for a long time since the beginning of the season, but now they are at the 3rd place because they have tough fixtures here. They are playing against Arsenal this game week. They are playing against Manchester United in game week 10, and in game week 12 they are playing against Chelsea, and then they are playing against Liverpool. So we will talk about why we are dropping Manchester City players, especially Haaland, but this might give you a good idea why it is, because fixtures are kind of important for projections. Again, we will talk about it. And so Manchester City has really tough fixtures despite being a very good team. And worst teams, we have Luton Town, Sheffield United, Burnley, Nottingham Forest, Everton, Wolves, Fulham, Bournemouth, Brentford, and Chelsea. And the worst fixture here for this game week is Luton Town against Tottenham. Offensively, it's only 3.4. So we are kind of thinking that Tottenham will keep a clean sheet with a high probability, but who knows? I mean, in terms of probability, they are kind of it's looking tough for Luton Town, and Luton Town's fixture in general is really kind of tough even after that. So they're kind of playing against Nottingham Forest, not too bad, but then they have Aston Villa, Liverpool, and then Manchester United consecutively, which makes one of the worst teams. Well, the worst team in terms of fixture quality. Okay, so this was the fixture ticker. Anything you want to mention here, James, or can we switch to the wildcard discussion?
I mean, I've just been staring at this for like 5 minutes, and all I can think about is how hilarious it is that Chelsea are in the bottom half. I mean, I guess the other thing that strikes me as kind of surprising is how little correlation the picks that I seem to want to make bear to this fixture difficulty, right? Like, I mean, I am going for, spoiler alert, I'm almost certainly got Watkins in my starting 11 game week 8, but I'm surprised to see that Aston Villa are fairly far down and don't have a huge kind of offensive rating there. But I guess Watkins is such a talismanic figure. He probably consumes a larger portion of that than most offensive assets. Similarly, like, you've got Man United. If Eze were fit, I would almost certainly be going Eze, even though he's towards the bottom. And then at the top, Liverpool, I'm almost certainly only going to have Salah. And then, yeah, Man City as well. I'm not going to have many of those guys. So I just find it interesting that it seems like my picks at the moment are being driven more by the quality of the individual player than the strength of the team that they're playing for.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think for some people, they want to work their way to, like, from the fixture quality, like fixture ticker, to their individual picks, but it doesn't work like that in FPL, as you mentioned. I mean, Watkins, for example, has great also bonus point potential, and also, like, even though offensive average is pretty low, it might be because of, let's say, midfielders who is bringing the average down. So individual projections are much more important, but this is just for people to have an idea of what's coming up. This was especially useful to mention that Newcastle has great fixtures defensively, when we were kind of like encouraging people to drop Chelsea defenders in favor of Newcastle. And people were like, yeah, Newcastle didn't keep a clean sheet for like X months. Like, how are you going to answer that? But then they kept clean sheet. Defenders got lots of bonus points too, which we missed, unfortunately, with you. But yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Wildcard 8. We kind of talked a little bit about why we are wildcarding, what pushed this decision. And the second topic we will talk about today is whether having Haaland or not. It almost feels like content creators are using Haaland as a bait, like, oh, I created this team without Haaland and I really like it, but I won't probably go for it. But in our case, I think we are seriously considering, like, you are almost certain that we won't have Haaland in our wildcard team. Would you like to explain why we are dropping Haaland in general?
Yeah, I suppose so. It's kind of an interesting one, right? Like, it seems like everybody's starting only in the last few days to come around to the no Haaland thing. Whereas I think from when I realised that Wildcard 8 was a reasonable possibility, I don't think I ever considered that Haaland would be part of my team. I mean, it was fairly clear, probably before the season even started, that Salah would be, I think, the superior premium asset for the next handful of games. And I mean, it's certainly clear to me before game week 1 that fitting both into a draft leads to some really nasty issues with flexibility and just an overall pretty poor team structure. And I've almost been on a journey in the other in the other direction, right? Like, I wasn't considering Haaland, and now, only seeing the discussions about wildcard this week, I've started to looking at ways where he might be included. But yeah, to say the least, I'm far from sold.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on the Haaland thing, Sertal?
Yeah, I didn't really have much idea on that, and you know that last season I had a bad season, so I was kind of scared to go against like highly owned players in general. But then I realized that well, I'm playing with analytics, like I shouldn't really care about the
Mm,
ownership that much, and if you kind of like decide that you are not going to use that information, like we were able to captain Morris in peace last game week. I mean, I'm glad that things went okay, but um, for Holland, I didn't again have strong feelings. I just checked the model if forcing him in, if it is how much EV am I really losing? If it is only like 0.1 or something, then you might as well say that yeah, I will play with less risk so that I will bring him in. I don't care losing 0.1. But if the EV drop is significant, like I don't know, like 10 points, 15 points, then you are kind of thinking that well, this might be my chance to actually catch up to high ranks actually. So I try to look at it with a positive light. So I'm perfectly fine going without
yeah, that's
Holland.
an interesting. It's an interesting way of framing it. I'm not sure if I completely agree that as analytics managers, we should be ignoring effective ownership, but I think we have tools available to us to think about effective ownership in a different way
Yeah.
than we might if we didn't have access to these tools. So I mean, I like to think about effective ownership and EV, and decisions based around effective ownership and EV in terms of the impact that they're likely to have on my distribution of outcomes. By which I mean there's kind of a shape of outcomes, with a peak in the middle, which is the
Mm-hmm.
average case. If I get really unlucky, I'll be off to the left hand side, and if I get lucky, I'll be on the right hand side somewhere. The decision to leave Haaland out, um, I do think that it shifts the distribution to the right. I think it shifts to the distribution to the
Yeah.
right. I mean, in a kind of a non-negligible way. But the more important effect and the more noticeable effect is that it widens the
Yeah.
distribution of outcomes significantly, right?
So
And I don't know, that's something that as a manager I really enjoy. Like
yeah,
it's fun having an opportunity to set yourself apart from the field. I mean, it's equally likely to backfire, right? But
yeah.
that's just what FPL is for me. I really like taking these risks. I don't like hiding behind my sofa. Oh, no, I do like hiding behind my sofa.
Yeah, you
I
do.
like hiding behind my sofa in a kind of excited, dominant fashion,
Yeah. Yeah.
which scares other people.
Yeah, you live behind your sofa. Like your
Exactly,
entire FPL
exactly.
decision history shows that.
My sofa is my fort, and sometimes even my barricade that I use on the offensive.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. And we will also talk about Richarlison. We kind of generated some drafts, but we were using yesterday's data, and then we got some new piece of information. It looks like Richarlison's expected minutes will go up significantly, especially for this game week. And bringing him in might actually open some new doors to us, but you will see that we don't have Richarlison in any of the drafts because his EV was not that high to begin with. But one player that we kind of see when we optimize is Alvarez. I see Alvarez in most of the optimal squads, like raw optimal, I should say. Just, throw the data to the optimization model and then run it, and then you get Alvarez and Watkins as forwards. But when I texted this information to James, James told me that, well, I don't know how I feel about Alvarez. I think I will drop him for Solanke. Why?
Yeah, I did. How are we doing this, Sertalp, by the way? We're going through these discussion points and we're picking up on every other one rather than every one. But that's fine. Let's keep going with it. Alvarez, yeah, I think I am scarred, to be honest. Alvarez is far from a bad pick. In the short term, especially, I think he's a really, really good pick. I think if you are to make a rigorous argument against Alvarez, the argument is in 10 game weeks' time, in 12, 15 game weeks' time, I don't think his X-Mins are as secure as other forward assets or even other City assets. And when the eventual City double comes in, I'm not sure that Alvarez is the one that I'll want to have in my team. Maybe it turns out he will be the one that I want to have in my team. But right now, I think the level of certainty we can have about that is fairly low.
Okay.
But in a similar sense, I just I'm terrified of what he'll do to me if he does drop out the team. I mean, this season we've had Gabriel, we've had Richarlison, who were great, who seemed great short term, but with some kind of creeping X-Min doubts long term, and they've just destroyed me mentally. And I mean, it's weird thinking of Dominic Solanke as some kind of solid ground, but that is how he feels to me at this point. I just want a player who's going to start every game, from now till the end of time,
More
and it doesn't
players.
feel exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think for now Alvarez is close, but long term, I just can't convince myself.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, by the way, I listed these discussion topics, but we will talk some of these when we are talking about the drafts in a second. So I will also talk a little bit about the process for wildcard optimization, how it looks like in general for us, and then we will talk about the captaincy at the end. But let's start with the raw optimal team number 1. So we are using FPL reviews projections. We are using 0.85 decay, so that's default. Free transfer value is 1.5. Free transfer use penalty is 1.2. So every time we make a transfer, we are kind of penalizing ourselves because we are kind of like betting on that the fact that we will be able to do this transfer, which is not, sometimes not the case because there are, other players you have to replace. And bench weights are default and transfers are not allowed. So this is pretty much our baseline configuration as far as the parameters go. And in this optimal team, we have Onana in the goal, we have Cash, Dalot, Udogi in defense, Mbeumo, Salah, Rashford, Maddison, Son in midfield, and Watkins and Alvarez in forwards. And bench consists of Areola, Archer, Robertson, and Zinchenko. One thing that I will mention here is that I kind of see that this is interesting, but most of the time, optimal teams this season have only 3 defenders, and you are kind of like rotating them based on their good fixtures. But this midfield line, if you check it, they are kind of playing in every game week in this horizon, because even if they have tough fixtures, they are able to play. Their projections are not that low, and I don't know. Like when I first ran this, I kind of like the fact that it has also 2 Liverpool players that I can actually play. Yeah, this was the baseline. So, any comments on this team?
Yeah, I agree. I would love to have a second Liverpool player in there along with Salah, but I just can't quite make it work on my solver. Yeah, the midfield, the 5 mids trend is interesting. I think it's just that there is so much value in midfielders in the kind of 6.5 to 7.5 mil range.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mbeumo and Maddison are both just fantastic value for money.
Yeah,
And and you've got others in there. Even if they didn't exist in the game, I think that the default structure would probably still be a 3-5-2 or a 4-5-1. I just think that the value is in midfield this year, as is so often the case in FPL.
Yeah, agreed. And if you just check the projections in the long term, you will notice that because of decay, we have better fixtures at the beginning of the horizon. I mean, Son is playing against Luton Town, and Salah has great 3 consecutive fixtures where we kind of captain him, and then we have Rashford with a really good fixture in game week 12 against Luton Town. So you are able to cover almost like every good captaincy option with this kind of a team. So you are kind of rotating between Son, Salah, and Rashford for only 1 game week. But we compare this to like Haaland, where we will talk about captaincy at the end of the episode, but whose projections are not as high as like these people. So you mainly need Salah for captaincy for these fixtures. I mean, his EV is already high. Like, even if you don't captain him, you probably need him. It's pretty high. And one more thing to notice here is that for midfielders, I mean, as I mentioned, the projections are really good overall. But this kind of a team, like if you don't schedule any transfers, kind of, you might have some issues with the defenders. You might notice that their projections are not the highest, especially like you are kind of playing like Udogi against Aston Villa in game week 13, where the projected points is only 2.92. And also around that region, actually, like projections are around 3.0, more or less, which is not the best, but again, you are kind of playing defenders like at a minimal stage, like you are going for the best baseline you can find, and then midfielders are essentially where the EV is at, as you mentioned. So the 5 midfield structure is bringing you lots of expected value or projected points, I should say. And so this was the default team, and then what if we allow transfers? Like, what if we ask optimization to come up with some scheduled transfers? And one thing that we noticed immediately is Arsenal midfielders. So we need to have them eventually, and Odegaard is actually coming in game week 10 in place of Maddison. And then Saka is coming in game week 13, if I see it correctly. And then to make this happen, though, Model replaces Robertson and Udogi with Newcastle defenders. So it brings Trippier and Burn, and then Mubama is on the bench here instead of Archer. And the rest of the team is the same. So as you see, like structurally is the same, but we are selling Maddison for Odegaard and then Rashford for Saka down the line to actually have that kind of a flexibility. The optimization model is downgrading some of these players. Yeah, so what do you think about this one? Like bringing Arsenal midfielders, I think is important.
Yeah. The Maddison to Odegaard move seems to be the kind of, I guess, thematic move of the game week 8 wildcard. Like, it appears everywhere that you allow transfers, and when the solver is screaming at you to do a move like this, or to plan in a move like this, it's worth planning in a move like this. We don't need Odegaard for the next few weeks, but we sure as hell need him down the line, I think. And Maddison is just a really convenient temporary gap filler for the short while. So yeah, this team makes a lot of sense, and as we'll find out, it's relatively close to what I've landed on.
Yeah, and if you just check the projected points for the longer horizon, I mean, it is not too different. The only exception is, well, Odegaard has lots of good projections in that horizon. He's playing against Sheffield United with a 6.0 EV, and then he has like Burnley game, Wolves, Luton Town. So he is a good player to have. And then we bring Saka. I mean, there are some now questions about Saka's fitness, but eventually, I mean, when he's available, Model is bringing him for the games against Wolves and Luton Town. So I think by that time we will need Arsenal midfielders as much. Well, we will have hopefully Odegaard, but then Saka is also coming into play here. And so if we just compare these two teams side by side, what's different between them? Plan 1 is the team without transfer scheduled, and Plan 2 is the team with the transfer scheduled. So for the first 2 game weeks, there's not enough like big difference. But started with game week 10, like Maddison is playing against Crystal Palace with 4.3 EV. On the other hand, if you bring Odegaard, he will have 6.0 EV against Sheffield United, which is massive. And then that one alone actually takes you a little bit ahead of the first plan without no transfer scheduled. And down the line in game week 14, when Arsenal is playing against Wolves, so the gap actually increases, step by step, all of these game weeks. But at the end, there is almost like 6 EV, like 5.5, I think. EV difference between not scheduling any transfers versus planning to bring Odegaard and Saka down the line. And that's actually enough to convince optimization model, because even if we penalize these transfers with 1.2 or whatever your parameter is, it's actually worth planning around. Well, the downside is obviously you don't have Robertson, but if you just check it, like for example, in game week 10, Robertson is playing against Nottingham Forest with 4.5 EV, but Trippier's EV is 4.3 against Wolves. So you're not kind of losing in some of these games. There are certain games where, game week 11, where Robertson is playing against Luton Town and Trippier is playing against Arsenal, but overall you come on top by replacing Robertson with Newcastle defenders, essentially. Robertson and Udogi, I should mention. With this, let's talk about your draft. I think your draft looks similar structurally, but there are some differences.
Ooh, there it is. Yeah, I think one thing that we need to mention about our situation with respect to the team that you just showed is that I think with that draft, the planned move of Maddison to Odegaard leaves nothing in the bank.
Yes.
Which is obviously something that should be avoided. The question of how much you really want to leave in the bank in these situations is still, I think, quite an open question. But I like to leave, $500,000 or a bit less in these kind of long-term planning scenarios, just to ensure that you've got some, you've got a buffer, you've got some wiggle room there, where if things aren't going your way, then you can still make the plan work. So yeah, this team, as you can see, the big, I guess, difference with the last one is Solanke instead of Alvarez, as we discussed. This team actually has $1 million in the bank. So I think we're losing 0.6 on the Maddison to Odegaard move. So even with that move, there's still a 0.4 buffer, which to me is very comfortable. And besides that, I just feel very comfortable with this team, right? Like long term, they all seem like fairly solid picks, and sometimes you can kind of overplay a wild card and plan too carefully, and things all fall apart once it starts to go down the toilet. But I don't know, I've said this before with other wildcards that haven't gone so well, but I feel quite comfortable with this structure, and I feel good about keeping this team, well, the backbone of the team, for a long time.
Yeah, it's a great team. And for people who are listening, so Trout's draft consists of Areola and Onana as goalkeepers, and defenders as Cash, Dalot, Zinchenko, Burn, Trippier. For midfielder, we have Mbeumo, Salah, Rashford, Son, Maddison, so it's the same midfield line. And we have Archer, Watkins, and Solanke. So as you see, so the main difference is actually Alvarez to Solanke from the last Sol.
I'm so sorry about that. That's just a classic noob podcasting error, isn't it? Not reading out my FPL team for the listeners at home.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I'm not a pro at this, clearly.
Yeah, but I mean, so when you first actually sent me this team, I was kind of surprised that you're dropping Alvarez for Solanke, because Alvarez has great potential, but then you kind of mentioned about his expected minutes not being reliable, and we got burned with Richarlison and Gabriel, as you mentioned. So I'm okay with playing it safe, like playing with more nailed players, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, this draft is great, and let's talk about another draft. So this is again a raw optimal team. This is number 3, but this time we are using decay as 1. So when you use decay base set to 1, you are kind of also hoping to get those like future game week EV into account, and then it will bring some of the players who has great EV down the line to your team like immediately. And in our case, we talked about this, but Odegaard and Saka. I don't know if Saka's minutes will go down a little bit. I haven't actually able to track the news, but it's almost the same team, except we have Gaye in defense, and midfield line we have Odegaard, Saka, Mbeumo, Salah, Son. So we don't have Maddison or Rashford. So they're immediately replaced with Arsenal midfielders. And in forward, we have Watkins and Alvarez the same. And then on the bench, we have Areola, Archer, Robertson, and Zinchenko. So Robertson is coming from the first team again. So if you allow transfers, the only player it replaces is, well, the key player it replaces is actually it replaces Onana with Flaken, so that it can start with Rashford and Madison, and then eventually get Odegaard and Saka. So I found it a little bit interesting, because if you use your decay, like if you solve the problem with no decay, it's actually downgrading the goalkeeper instead of doing something else, like instead of dropping Robertson, for example. So there is also like some maybe discussion about what the decay should be when we are actually optimizing with the wildcard, but 0.85 is kind of like a proven value, like over and over when we are doing FPL planning, and short-term EV is much more reliable than long-term EV. But yeah, what do you want to say about that, James?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I am not at all settled on the goalkeeper pick. I quite like the idea of Flecken. I think that the real advantage of Flecken comes into play just outside of our 12 game week horizon on the 13th game week, probably, when Brentford get their double game week.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Because you can very easily, assuming that we're not planning to free hit in the blank, you can very easily just bench Flecken for that and then play him. Admittedly, his second fixture is Man City, so it's not the best double in the world, but that's still an extra couple of EV. It's nothing to be sniffed at.
Yes.
So Flecken is a presence in my mind, I think, and probably will continue to be. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I also kind of like the idea of not downgrading Robertson, and then instead of like using Onana to provide some of these in the bank amount we need for Saka and Odegaard transfers. But again, having a bigger budget is useful. This team still has Alvarez, which can be easily downgraded to Solanke for extra cash in the bank.
Yeah, no Newcastle players though in that team as well, which
Yeah,
I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I cannot see myself going without Trippier. I think Trippier is he's just the pick, isn't he? Like
he's a beast, yeah.
Yeah.
Getting the bonus,
really got to have
3-point bonus.
He's so good. He's so good. As much as I would love Robertson, I don't think he's going to come in at the cost of Trippier.
Yeah. And if we just compare all of these four teams we have mentioned for drafts, EV goes like total EV. 446 was the first team, and then we have 452. So you are kind of increasing 6 EV by scheduling transfers from 1 to 2. And then if we set decay to 1 and then solve without transfers, you get 448. So again, it is like 2 EV higher than the first team, which is focusing on closer game weeks a little bit better by bringing Saka and Odegaard from the get-go. But if we again allow transfers and then replace Onana with Flecken, that team total EV is 453. So that team gives you the highest EV, but at a cost of lower EV for game week 8, 9. So those game weeks you are kind of a little bit sacrificing so that you can have higher EV, like overall in total for the entire horizon. Again, it's something that people need to probably think about, and like, do I want to do this? Again, short-term EV is more reliable because that players are available. There's always a chance of getting players getting injured, or maybe they are getting rotated, like in the case of Gabriel, like we have seen. But yeah, this is something to think about. And another comparison I want to mention is this one, where we compare optimal teams of several data sources. We have been using FPL Reviews data for all of these drafts, but how does it look like if we just compare FPL Review, Fantasy Football Hub, Fantasy Football Scout, and Mikael Tokmam's data And a disclaimer here that I'm using the data from last night. So, for example, Hub has Estupinan in this optimal team, which needs to be replaced, obviously. But yeah, we talked about FA Review's optimal team several times, but let me go over the Fantasy Football Hub's optimal team. It has Johnston and Turner as goalkeepers, and Castagne, Trippier, Cash, Estupinan, and Pinnock as defenders. Son, Bruno Fernandes, Madison, Saka, Mitoma as midfielders, and Haaland, Vissa, Archer as forwards. In Fantasy Football Scouts optimal team, we have Leno and Areola, Trippier, Pedro Porro, Cash, Aldakhil, and Taylor as defenders. And then we have Bruno Fernandes, Salah, Diaby, Neto, Mubemo. And Haaland, Watkins, Archer are forwards. And finally, Mikael Toklam's transfer algorithm gives Areola and Flecken in the goal, Pedro Porro, Trippier, Cash, Taylor, and Baldock as defenders. Son, Bruno Fernandes, Rashford, Bowen, Mubemo, midfielders, and Haaland, Watkins, Archer, the same forward line. So as you see, Review's team and Mikael's team somewhat similar, but Mikael has more weight on Manchester United midfielders, bringing both Fernandes and Rashford to the optimal team. While in Review's team, we only have Rashford in comparison. Any comments on these teams, James? Like, what do you think?
Yeah. There's lots to say. I mean, looking at those two columns in the middle, the hub and the scout teams, I mean, it's like staring into the heart of darkness. I don't know what's going on with some of these picks. You've got Castagna in the hub team. That is an amazing pick. The double Burnley defense from scouts. I mean, I'm almost gobsmacked. Like, if not to say that these are bad picks, but I would just love to see somebody play a full season with this model as their only input, because they would play in just the most amazing way. It's fantastic to see this kind of, humans are nowhere near as original as this. It's brilliant. Other comments to make. I think it's interesting that Salah is missing from Mikel's optimal team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that Mikel himself and Fabio Borges, who's a very heavy user of Mikel's model, they both started the season with Haaland and Salah.
Yeah.
And I thought if there's ever any time, that you would have Haaland and Salah, it would be for the Game Week 8 wildcard rather than Game Week 1. Yeah. But I think it's just the state of the midfield when you've got Son there, and you've got the United assets. I suppose there's just no way of stretching the budget that far, which is a shame. But besides that, I think it's interesting to see that Mikel and Review's model, they're much more correlated than the others, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised that both like Hub, Scott, and Mikel. You're right, by the way. Yeah, Mikel Tokmams are more correlated with Review compared to others. But Hub, Scott, and Mikel, they all have Haaland in the optimal team. And Scott model has both Salah and Haaland. And you can see how destructive it is on the team. Like, you are downgrading several players. You have like Diaby and Neto instead of like, I don't know, like Son, Madison. Just so that you can have Haaland in that team. I mean, it is maybe, it will be hindsight optimal at the end of the things. But this kind of helps you to understand that to bring Salah, which Review really likes, and as you mentioned, Mikel's algorithm usually likes Salah, you need to drop Haaland. It's not kind of like possible to bring both of them at the same time and have a decent team, in my opinion, but yeah.
Well, maybe if you're bullish on Richarlison as an asset, then maybe that makes the task easier, but hey, that's a whole different discussion, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, yeah, Richarlison again. I think the problem, as you kind of pointed out, I mean, great expected minutes this game week, and I also asked Yen about it, and he also thinks that his minutes going forward might not be the best. So, I mean, he was.
I guess Sorry, there's a lot to talk about with the Richarlison. Obviously, I am biased, and so are you, Sertalp. We can't deny it. We hate Richarlison after what he's done to our not just our real points, not just our massive data rank, but our dignity this season.
That's
Holding
true.
him for those weeks and then selling him before that substitute appearance with the goal and assist was so painful.
Extra
So
time.
yeah, I am biased, and there is absolutely no way that Fabio himself could convince me to own him. But I think there's a fairly sound argument against owning him. So obviously we know Solomon, who was playing some minutes as at left wing, is out for a few months.
Hmm.
And in game week 8, it's true, Spurs basically only have Son, Kulusevski, and Richarlison for their front line. I mean, they have I think they have Veliz, who they signed from Argentina in the summer. I think he's fit, but I don't think there's any real possibility that he'll start. And Brian Heel is back in training as well. I don't think he's got any realistic chance of starting either. So those players will definitely be part of the front line, and you can see Richarlison playing a lot of minutes, right? Especially if Son's minutes continue to be managed. If he can't play the full game, then probably, I mean, the bench even doesn't have many forward options. So you probably bring in one of those players for Son, and then that's another boost to Richarlison's minutes. So I can totally see Richarlison's expected minutes for game week 8 being somewhere in the 80s, which
Yeah.
is probably the highest they've been all season. So I think for game week 8, he's an absolutely fantastic pick. And especially for those with Saka, who's an injury doubt and heading towards Man City, and they've got no other holes to patch up in their team. I mean, yeah, the move Saka to Richarlison, if you're wildcarding game week 9 especially, just looks really tasty.
Yeah.
But holding him beyond game week 9, when especially I think after the international break, we're expecting Brennan Johnson to come back and he'll be a major threat to Richarlison's minutes.
Hmm.
I just don't see it being quite viable.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's as simple as that for me. I would really want Richarlison to be a great asset for more than one game week, and he's just not. And he's done this to us before, and I don't want to be Richarlison again. It's not very fun.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like getting burned twice by the same player. That could hurt.
Oh,
I agree. So another topic I want to talk about today is, so when we are using these parameters and then we are using the optimization model to come up with a team like this one that we have mentioned, but then you don't know how reliable some of these picks are. Like, can I replace like Watkins with an alternative or another like midfielder with an alternative without losing too much EV? Or if the EV drop will be so significant that I need to lock this player down. So for that purpose, actually sensitivity analysis is particularly useful because expected value changes every day almost. And actually that sensitivity analysis was the first kind of like thing we did together with James. He was a guest for my tutorial series where he actually presented the idea of using these kind of like perturbations, and then you can optimize over and over again to see what the percentage of player appearing in the optimal team. So whenever we talk about these things, people think that there is a single optimal team and every other player is not optimal. So they're kind of like using those players against like analytics pick, saying that you didn't pick this guy, but then he got like 20 points. But the reality is sensitivity analysis is particularly useful, and for that purpose, I use FPL reviews model. I'm using our Python solver with 12 game week horizon. So it's the longest horizon we actually present today. And we also enable transfers down the line with a slightly higher decay, 0.9. I just wanted to have picks that are good for longer term. And for goalkeepers, it's actually a little bit all over the place. We have Areola appearing in 46% of the optimal squads, Sanchez 40%, Onana 33%, and Flacco 30%. So I think goalkeeper selection will be interesting. There are some options actually. You can actually downgrade without losing too much EV, so that maybe you can do something else with that extra budget. Or you maybe go for Onana just to play safe and get your EV. What do you think about goalkeepers in general?
Wow, Allison is an absolutely wild pick. I can't even. I can't believe that I've not even considered Allison. That's exactly the kind of thing that I would go for. I mean, I remember I really stirred the pot in. I think it was probably 2021. I think it might have even also been a game week 8 wildcard when I suggested going for Edison.
Yeah,
And back then, I think the landscape's changed on this since,
yeah,
but back then going for a 6 million price goalkeeper was not something that anybody did,
yeah.
and I got a lot of negative feedback for that, and I can't imagine how people would react if I picked Allison. So I'm definitely going to have to play around with some solves between now and the deadline, and see just how much he costs in terms of what I'm sacrificing to get him in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that would be
might be
fantastic.
fun. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, the prejudice against premium goalkeepers. I mean, it changed like over the years, but yeah, there was certainly people who are completely against the idea of having premium goalkeepers. Even now, I mean, people just kind of don't enjoy seeing premium goalkeepers in a draft. But yeah, you're right. Bringing Ellison in will be really fantastic for that purpose. We also talk
That'd be
about
so much fun.
having more Liverpool players. Maybe he's the one. I don't know.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered it until now. That's
I'm
it's a fun one.
glad it's helping you. And for defenders, there are some picks that are above all others, and the remainings are somewhat replaceable. So we have Dalot at 76%, Trippier again 76%, Zinchenko 70%, Cash 63%. So these four are pretty much like in most of the squads, and all the remaining ones are below 50%, so they're kind of replaceable. So we have Burn, Pedro Porro, Colville, Udogi, Taylor. I even see like Robertson with 13%, even though he appears in no transfer scheduled plans from the get-go. But as you see here, he's not really a robust pick if you are kind of also scheduling transfers down the line for the longer horizon. And I see Alexander Arnold at 6.67% at the bottom of this chart. And what do you think about the top four?
I'd love to have Alexander Arnold in again. That would be a lot of fun, but it's not going to be game week 8 for me. Yeah, my feeling is pretty much reflected in what you said. I think that several of these picks, Dallo, Trippier, Cash, probably Zinchenko, are almost nailed in with these no Haaland drafts. I just think they're very clear outliers in terms of the value that they provide. And I probably will just be going for these top 5 most robust assets. Pedro Porro is a fun one if you want to burn a bit more cash, to pardon the pun. If you'll pardon the pun.
I can.
Yeah, besides that, yeah, the further down the list you look, the more fun it looks, but the less I'll be able to forgive myself for going for it. I mean, bringing back in Gabriel, can you imagine
No,
if we wildcarded in game week 8 and we had Gabriel and Richarlison? I think that that would be a sign that life is pointless and we're all just going in circles without any real progress being made.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely don't want many players from my game week 1 squad. I mean, I thank them for their effort for bringing my rank to 2.7 million.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's time to part the ways. Yeah, I'm more excited about having like Trippier or I don't know. Some of these picks are probably talking more to me. And midfielders and forwards. In midfielders, we have Son and Salah with 100%, so they appear everywhere, which is surprising because in sensitivity analysis, I mean, I didn't run too many of these iterations, only 30, but you usually expect these players to, at most appear in 90 or 95% of the time, not 100%. It's incredible that they both appear with 100%. Son and Salah, so those two are actually pretty much locked. And then we have Madison 90%, Mbemo 90%, and Bruno Fernandes at 53%. So these four actually, Son, Salah, Madison, Mbemo, is locked for no Haaland teams. And then Fernandes, Rashford is 40%, Richarlison at 10%. I can't really believe seeing Richarlison again here. But yeah, so the fifth pick might be one of these, depending on what you are trying to do.
This is interesting. Yeah, Richarlison, I can't believe he comes up here because you actually ran these last night before the Solomon news came out.
Yes. Well, probably his percentage is higher now.
Yeah, almost certainly.
I mean,
I would also expect the fact that he is inevitably, his stock is rising, probably means that with another good value option in midfield, the stock of Son and Salah goes down a bit, and Haaland, maybe, as we'll talk about in a sec, comes up. What else is there to say here? I looking at these lists almost just makes me wonder why I spend so long thinking about FPL, because all you need to do is run one algorithm. You've got 2 of the top 3 goalkeepers. I'm picking the top 5 defenders. I'm picking probably 5 of the top 6 midfielders. It's just, what is the point, What is the point?
I didn't want you to, get into depression, but yeah, that's pretty
It's
much
okay. I mean, it's not our fault that the algorithms that we've made are better than us. We've been exceeded by our own creations,
unfortunately,
haven't we? Yeah.
Or maybe
it is what it
fortunately,
is.
I don't know. Well, I always say that FPL is not a good game in general. I often compare it to Monopoly. That's how I feel. I mean, it's almost like entirely based on luck. Yes, there are some...
That's a fantastic comparison.
Thank you.
In fact, it's probably worse than Monopoly, because Monopoly, I think there is some strategy. I mean...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find them very similar. I hate Monopoly. Just setting the record straight.
And I hate FPL.
Maybe we should delete our teams instead of...
Yeah, maybe we should become Monopoly Trout. And start a Monopoly podcast. That'd be fun.
Yeah. And one more thing to note here is that since I'm enabling transfers here, so it's able to schedule some of the transfers, that might be the reason why Richarlison is here. So maybe it starts with Richarlison and then drops him maybe in a game week or two. But yeah, something to keep in mind. And let's talk about the forwards. We have Watkins appearing in 93% of the squads, and then Archer. I mean, Archer was in all models' optimal team, as you can recall, as the bench forward. We have Solanke and Alvarez, both at 33%, which kind of actually supports your point, James. I mean, we were talking about, Alvarez appearing in the optimal team if you use the default parameters, but then Solanke is actually, when you perturb the values, appear as the same rate as Alvarez, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I hesitate to kind of derive the conclusion that Solanke is as good an asset as Alvarez from this.
Yes.
I mean, because obviously it's not many simulations, so you never know. Yeah. But it's definitely a sign that Solanke, in many of these solves that we've been doing, kind of lurks just beneath the surface.
Yes.
Like some kind of crocodile waiting to pounce on those fixtures.
Yes. That's a good
some
analogy.
Other interesting names coming up here. I can't believe Calvert-Lewin's there 6% of the time. I guess this is just, sometimes you get some crazy scenarios, and the way that sensitivity analysis works, by the way, is it's just basically polling what the hindsight optimal team is likely to be in a certain realization of the future.
Yeah.
So it's not saying that, there's like a 6% probability that Calvert-Lewin should be in the optimal team or something like that. It's just an estimate that in 6% of wacky future realities, Calvert-Lewin is a hindsight optimal pick, which exactly. I guess I can believe. I mean, he's a footballer. He sometimes kicks the ball. He sometimes kicks the ball in the goal. So, as does Erling Haaland, who's even lower.
3%.
Wild. I I can't help but think that this may be a modelling issue. I cannot believe that Haaland is only in 3% of hindsight
You
optimal
just want.
teams.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I think for Haaland team it drops Salah, so it's probably the only case where Salah actually. Well, I'm saying this, but then Salah is 100%, so maybe just trying to fit them both in. Probably. Anyway, I can
Fascinating.
check it for you. Yeah, and these are the results of sensitivity analysis. One more thing I want to talk about this thing over here is if we compare a regular optimal with the optimal team with Haaland forced in over the 12 game week horizon, you are losing almost like 10 EV. And what happens is it drops Cash, Salah, and Onana for Colville, Gibbs White, and Areola, so that you can actually have Haaland in your team and still have a solid EV. But even that one is 10 EV less. I always use, I don't know, for some reason I use 0.5 EV per game week as kind of like a measure for myself. So if forcing a player in this case for 12 game week, is going to give me more than 6 EV difference, then I probably don't do it. I mean, I don't trust myself enough to, force this player in because I really believe in him. I mean, 10 EV is significant in general, and it's more than my threshold. So that's why I kind of, I don't think Haaland will be part of the optimal wildcard team. I mean,
that's really
you're the
interesting.
puppet master, so you will probably.
I really like that. I've not thought much about what the right benchmark is for this kind of decision and the number of points per game week you're willing to sacrifice. But I quite like the benchmark of 0.5. That feels about right to me. I think in general, kind of the points per game week metric or EV per game week metric is kind of underrated in the analytics community. I see a lot of people talking about the kind of sum EV difference across their drafts, but always in a longer horizon solve, differences are going to be bigger than in a shorter horizon solve. So thinking about it in terms of EV per game week makes a lot of sense. I quite like that.
And so again, we talked about this over and over again, but so if we enable transfers, the first transfer the model is scheduling is Madison to Odegaard on game week 10. And for this one, actually, as you mentioned this actually, so for the team we have mentioned with Sanchez and Onana, it is only leaving 0.6 in the bank. So when game week 10 comes, it replaces Madison with Odegaard, and then you have exactly 0 in the bank. So these kind of plays are actually very dangerous, I should mention. I mean, in terms of flexibility, you are kind of really hoping that, by the time you sell Madison, either his price will be higher, so you will, sell him for higher, or Odegaard's price will stay the same, which is, well, unlikely in most cases because lots of people will start transferring him in, probably for those good fixtures. So that's why it is worth, I mean, I just kind of recommend people to check, what the in the bank amount is every game week and see if it makes sense. I mean, if you are having exactly 0 in the bank for game week 10, this is very unrealistic, I should say. I mean, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And so you won't be able to probably afford Odegaard in that case. So that's why I kind of like the idea of having more in the bank when we're using our wildcard.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that needs to be probably publicly discussed and written about the different ways that you can, I guess, codify constraints relating to the amount of money in the bank in optimization models, because it's it's something that I've thought about a lot, and it's really interesting, an interesting area, and it's still much more an art than a science. But if you're making your own optimization model, there are a lot of neat tricks that you can use to say, I only want this constraint to apply to future game weeks and not for the current game week, because obviously I know that I can get away with a 0 in the bank gap in the next game week,
Yeah.
right? But I'm very unlikely to be able to get away with it in 8 game weeks time.
Yeah.
So probably this isn't the best forum for this discussion, but it's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I personally like to leave for future planning generally like at least kind of zero point 0.3, 0.4 in the bank, just as a kind of a long term buffer.
Mm-hmm.
Anything tighter than that, I feel very bad about. And yeah, if I mean sometimes I'll allow it if I can get the asset in earlier
Yeah.
as an emergency resort, but
Yeah.
in general, yeah, I do like to keep a bit of a buffer there.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, yeah, one idea that I kind of mentioned to you before we started recording, actually, you can even like penalize some of these transfers. Like you can say that for every transfer, I will lose 0.1 or maybe even like 0.2 in the bank. So if you kind of give it to the model, it never will, it won't be able to schedule these kind of transfers because it will be infeasible by definition. But yeah, so yeah, some of these discussions are actually needed in the community. So thanks for bringing it up.
Definitely.
And finally, captaincy. Well, if we check the ensemble model, Haaland is 6.22 and Son is 6.07, even though Haaland is playing against Arsenal away and Son is playing against Luton Town. So in my mind, Son has the better fixture. The funny thing here is Haaland is the top pick for Draft Town, Fantasy Football Fix, Fantasy Football Hub, and Son is the top pick for Fantasy Football Scout, FPL Review, and Mikael Toklam's transfer algorithm. And FPL team is favoring Salah. Um, the funny thing is FPL Review doesn't have Haaland in top 5 options. I mean, Haaland is 6th, if I remember correctly. Uh, Even though Haaland appears higher in most of these models, except Mikael Toklam. I feel like FPL Review and Mikael Toklam has more weight in the fixture quality than the player's own quality as far as the modeling goes. What do you think,
Mm.
James?
Yeah, again, it's interesting to just note that FPL Review and Mikhail Tovkan, who have, I think, maybe put the most time into their models than any of these.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they put many years of their lives, both of these people, into their model. It is interesting again to see how correlated those are, which I think gives me some security that Son is maybe the best pick, dependent on X-Men's, but that's something else to discuss entirely. And it's just very interesting because intuitively I agree with you, right? I feel like Son against Luton is just a better fixture than Haaland against Arsenal,
Yeah.
and my intuition definitely lies there. So it's nice to see, I guess, the models that I prefer to use agreeing with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess more like the models we use more like FPL Review and Mikael Toklam are. Yeah. I mean, as they give more weight to the fixture difficulty, I think it talks more to us. Because
Mm,
we kind of feel like you mentioned it actually before again the recording that team strength is an easier way to model than the player's own quality, which might actually vary quite a bit and might not be that reliable. But team quality in general, or fixture quality, I should say. I mean, Luton Town, Tottenham, they will score. I mean, they will probably score. I can't really imagine Tottenham not scoring. Well, there is a probability always. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a
oh,
certainty.
so Sam, what have you done? Oh
I ruined it.
no, it's gonna be
Now
like
they will
1-0
blank.
Luton now, isn't it? That's terrible. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, at
It's
this.
interesting. I mean, there's almost like unlimited nuance to be had in this discussion, I think.
Mhm.
Like, a lot of this difference could be derived from how well the models are capturing Son's position.
Yeah,
Because obviously, this
that's
is,
true.
by the way, another interesting point that obviously Son's position, I think we're now expecting the bulk of his minutes to come at centre forward
Yeah.
instead of left wing, which is what we were expecting at the start of the season. And different models are likely to have captured that in different ways. And on a similar vein, when we were talking about Richarlison earlier, it's interesting to think about how we might have expected Richarlison's minutes to change across the season, because I was having a play around with on review earlier today. If you put Richarlison's X minutes up to, let's say, mid-80s,
Yeah.
and you shift Son's down a bit, which I think is fair to do to account for the fact that he's likely to have his minutes managed, Richarlison is almost like he's a proximal, optimal captaincy pick. Like
Yes.
you
Oh,
can,
wow.
yeah, seriously. I mean, but it's really surprising that to me, because
Well, that kind of,
Richarlison just on similar minutes, or slightly better minutes, Richarlison should not be better than Son. So I did a bit of a deep dive into this, and I was surprised to find that compared to kind of game weeks 1 to 3, when we were expecting all of Richarlison's minutes to come, pretty much all of Richarlison's minutes to come at centre forward, his underlying rates, when we plug the same minutes into review, his underlying rates have actually gone up since then.
yeah.
So I suppose there's some effect there of Spurs being a better team than we thought they were going into the season, and in those first couple of game weeks. That's definitely an effect. But I'm also just wondering if these numbers, and Richarlison's numbers earlier, haven't, I guess, fully taken into the account the positions that we're expecting the Spurs front line to play.
Yeah.
Like, I just personally can't believe that Richarlison is anywhere near as good an asset at left wing than he is at centre forward. And I'm wondering the same about Son, how well these models all understand that the bulk of Son's minutes are likely to come from centre forward for the time being.
That's a really good point that you raise. Huh. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. The position matters, obviously. It changes your output level significantly. It's one of the most important parameters in a projection model, probably. But whether you have it in your model or not is a question mark. I mean, most of the time, because sometimes people just check the FBref data, and then they just put all those XG and XA and whatever clean sheets into a model, and then they generate. But you're right. I mean, the position matters quite a bit. Yeah.
I mean, so a lot of these models you would expect to kind of capture the change in position in a pretty complete way implicitly, because a lot of these will be taking the betting odds into account, and of course betting odds we would expect to be able to capture data like changes in position. But yeah, it would be interesting to look into and trying to work out which of these models do take betting odds into account and which don't.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so this was our wildcard optimization, wildcard draft talk. But before I let you go, James, I have 2 questions for you. Despite having the same team, you seem to be doing much better than I do mentally, especially when Gabriel and the Richarlison blanks, or I should say the disasters, that's a more fitting word. You came back with a more positive attitude after the bad game weeks we have. So how do you do this? How do you stay away from the game, or how do you stay positive in general?
Yeah, what do I do? God, I don't even know. I think probably through the middle of the week, but from the end of one game week to another, I do a lot of hard drugs to no, that's a joke. I think I am
Stay away
a
from
sadist.
social media. Oh, sadist. Okay.
Yeah. No. I mean, I'm joking slightly less about that, but still, obviously, slightly tongue in cheek. I think, through a kind of a wealth of awful experiences with FPL, I've managed to kind of gain a separation to some extent between my emotions and my outcomes, much better than I had a couple of years ago, for example. And while in the moment I definitely do get emotional when my captain blanks, or when Haaland destroys us in game week 8, I do get emotional, but I'm able to brush it off faster, and I'm able to kind of think of it as one of those funny things that happens and just happens to happen a lot more to me and you than other people, and that's kind of fine. Yeah, I guess during the week, I don't think about FPL a lot, and that's again something I've definitely got better at the last couple of years. I would be constantly checking. I think partly I had more free time a couple of years ago, and I would just be checking up on the FPL news and checking my live rank all of the time, and it was really affecting my headspace, and becoming more distant from it's really helped. In terms of kind of, I guess that's almost like the mood is one thing, and then the ability to react in a measured way to outcomes is another thing. I don't know. I think in some way, the last year has been so unkind to me in FPL that kind of all of the bad outcomes have blurred into one, and I can't remember any anymore. All I know is that last game week was probably a bad game week, and I can't remember why it's a bad game week. I can't remember if it's a bad game week because Haaland destroyed my rank, or if it's because I don't know, Son blanked or something like that. All I remember is that it's a bad game week, and I need to improve my decision-making process going forward. So yeah. I guess that's really just about it. Like, I just try not to think about it, but I'm getting better at not thinking about it as well.
I see. Okay, that's a great answer. And my second question is, now that massive data rank is tied to actual minutes, we're kind of ruined with you. I mean, I checked very briefly when the season review was alive for a short bit. Well, you always had a great MD rank, but this season it might be a little bit more challenging than usual. But
yeah,
what's your target for this season? I mean, if you're not targeting OR, are you targeting something, or are you just trying to have fun?
that's a really good question. Yeah, I don't know anymore. As you said, I think that having a kind of an unblemished, like I felt like not so much last season, but probably the 2 seasons before that, I had a fairly unblemished record with my decision making. I think I got really lucky over those 2 seasons, with how my picks, especially on assets with fairly risky minutes, panned out. That happened, I think, to some extent last season. Probably it was about average, and this season has just gone terribly. I think there's some effect where I haven't been making as good decisions as previous years. I've definitely been spending much less time examining minutes, just because I don't really have the time to do that at the moment. I just don't have the time to spend 2 hours for a couple of days, just really diving into the minutes that my assets are playing. And I think it's difficult to argue that hasn't had an effect. My minute security has just been absolutely awful. Again, Gabriel just was terrible. Richarlison was the same. We've had lots of captains who've had unexpected kind of early substitutions, and pretty much everything that could conceivably have gone wrong has gone wrong. And we're definitely the top, I guess, underlying ranks for us. Maybe XG could still be up there, but definitely in terms of EV accumulation, I don't think that we're going to be anywhere near the top. So in terms of my actual goal, I think my only goal is to beat Anthony at FPL Simpson on Twitter. It would just bring me so much joy to do better than him for one season. That was just, it's the only thing at this point that could put a smile on my face. I don't care where I finish. I don't care if I finish top 10k, top 20k, top 50k, 2 mil. As long as Anthony does worse than me, that's all I care about.
Because he was pretty lucky last 2 seasons, so you just
Anthony is just a joke of an FPL player. He's first of all, he when he makes good moves, he usually copies them from me. And also he rarely makes good moves, so even saying that is a stretch. But he's always riding the waves of luck, you know, and I can't wait for his comeuppance. I can't wait for this run that he's been on to end, and I can't wait to bring him down a peg or two. That's all I want in FPL, and at this point in life, I just want to beat him.
That's amazing. Okay.
What about you, Sertalp? What are your aims this season?
I don't know, to be honest. I think at the beginning of the season, you're always thinking about like, oh, can I make it to the top 10k, 100k? I mean, it's still early in the season and the ranks are pretty much dense, so that there's still a chance, obviously. But I feel like it doesn't really bring me any joy. Like, even if I was in like top 10k right now, would I feel more like satisfied with my experience? I think I'm just trying to enjoy the games I watch. I don't watch all the games. I try to catch one or two games. So whenever I have players in that game and if they do well, I'm just enjoying it. Last season was pretty brutal for me in terms of, tying my happiness to FPL results over the weekend. It was impacting my entire weekend. So I'm trying to stay away from it. So I am trying to keep myself from defining a target for myself. I mean, I would love to win my work mini league, or like beat maybe Buzz, maybe Sigurd. It always makes me happy to be on top of him. But
I would love to win my work mini league too. This week, one of my rivals at work, who hasn't made a transfer since game week 2 when they brought in Tonali, scored 109 points. They had Watkins captain, which they've had since game week 1.
Really?
They had Ben White. They had Trippier. They had Odegaard. It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. And despite the fact that the only move that they've made has been to bring in Tonali in game week 2, they're actually now ahead of me in terms of overall rank. So maybe my aim is just to beat that one person. But at this point, I don't even know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, as I say, it's Monopoly, man. Like you never know. Like
exactly,
if the worst player will get the best luck.
It's such a bad game.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it for today's episode. Anything you still want to add before we close the episode?
No, nothing in terms of the content. But I'd just like to say it's been a pleasure, and thanks for having me, Sertalp.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to host you, and hopefully we will see you more often in the podcast if your time allows and if your season goes well. So maybe you can come and talk about how Anthony is a bad player.
Bring me back after a really good game week.
Okay,
that's what you need to do. You need to wait until I have an absolute screamer of a game week, until we have an absolute screamer of a game week, and bring me back so that I can talk about how great it was, because talking about our misery is much less fun.
Yeah, I agree. Again, thanks for accepting the invite and being here. And before I close the episode, let me give some updates to our mini league. We have 272 teams now. Our mini league leader, Max Apollo, is at 493 points. So he's at 4K overall rank. Pretty solid. And if you're not in our mini league yet, make sure to join the fun. The code is 0JSDLA. And also our analytics Discord actually reached 1,000 members the previous day, so we are a very big community now. This was FPL Optimized Podcast, episode number 60 with the legendary Trout, James Palmer. Thanks for listening. Good luck with making your Game Week 8 decisions and your Wildcard decisions, and may your arrow be green. We will be back with another regular episode next week when the boss is back, hopefully. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you will get notified when the next episode is released, and do follow us on Twitter. For me, it's at Sertalp Bilal, and for Bas, it is at BalfiBB, and for James, it is FF_Trout. And you can also find FPL Optimized on YouTube this season. Until next time, stay curious and stay analytical. Goodbye.
Bye.